The disc landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO classified. UFO classified. No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Happy Fantopia Friday, my friends. I am Erica Lukes, and I am always super excited to spend Friday nights with you because you are the reason I am here. I look in chat and I see Lib, Northern UFOs, Doug Down Under, Bruce, Amy, all of you. I love the cohesive, respectable family, this group that we have. I love the fact that we can communicate and share ideas in a respectful manner. And as you know, that is something that strikes the very heart of me. I made a Facebook post this week in which I mentioned a very personal issue that I don't normally talk about, but I thought I would do it in front of 5,000 Facebook friends, and that was the story of the abuse that I suffered at the hands of my ex-husband when I was 23, physical abuse for quite a while, and ultimately led to the final moment when I was almost choked to death, which was quite special. But this kind of abuse and things to me became, again, it wasn't physical, but the verbal abuse became a prevalent theme in my life again when I started taking on a public role in ufology. And at the hands of a few very spineless, despicable human beings. You know, I have, as you know, have been attacked by bullies, by radio station owners, slandered. I've had some pretty incredible things happen, and at some point in time I will write a memoir so you can understand all of these things that happened. But I speak out because I feel it is incredibly important to talk about these things as leaders or people in the public eye. We have a responsibility to stand up, to protect other people, to protect witnesses and other researchers in the field. I had, a lot of feedback from people like Dr. Eric Davis, others in the field who weighed in about this. And I can tell you there were some people that weighed in that I am very aware of are responsible for letting this behavior continue. I will continue to talk about this and gather support. I know every single one of you out there listening knows how passionately I feel, and I know that you're all good people and you care to do the right thing for the integrity of this field. So there you have it. There was my little thing for today. I am going to be joining Minnesota MUFON. They have asked me to speak tomorrow via Skype in memory of my dear late friend, Craig Lang. And I will be doing that, and you can check that out. It's a live stream tomorrow. I'm going to try to make it through without crying because it's truly such a loss for me, for many others in the field. He was a wonderful human being. So you can join Minnesota MUFON tomorrow to see that. I will be speaking at the Utah UFO Festival, Memorial Day weekend. And I've got a couple other speaking gigs coming up that I will tell you about. But I've got to get to my guest tonight because this has been a long time in the making. Chris is somebody that I have watched for years, and he has done incredible work that I think we all need to absolutely get in to know about, to research. I think Canada is an incredibly intriguing place with regard to the UFO phenomenon. Chris Rutkowski is a Canadian science writer, educator with degrees in both astronomy and education. And since the 70s, he's been studying reports of UFOs, writing about investigations in his research. He has 8 published books on UFOs and related issues, including A Natural History, Abductions and Aliens, A World of UFOs. I saw it too on the big Book of UFOs, which came out in 2010. He's been on numerous TV shows, including Unsolved Mysteries, UFO Hunters, Sightings. He's been on the Paracast, Discoveries, Close Encounters, and A&E's The Unexplained. Chris, how freaking cool are you?
Well, maybe nerdy, maybe not cool. I have no idea.
I think that I'm just amazed. I posted a video, your YouTube video today, and it makes me smile to see that. I love it. I mean, you've been doing this how long? So tell us first of all, how you got into this.
Oh boy, there's a story and a half too. Well, back in the 70s, and yes, I'm very, very old. I was starting my university degree in astronomy. At the time, Canada was going through a bit of a flap of UFOs, so I was curious about what's going on. And in high school, I was reading all the stuff about what was happening. I was fascinated with the UFO phenomenon, and so I went into astronomy. And in my first year, my professors were really annoyed because people were calling the astronomy department with UFO reports. And of course, as good astronomers know, there's no such thing as UFOs. It's all in people's imaginations and minds and whatnot. So they were getting annoyed that they kept interrupting their very busy research and work for these phone calls. And I was in the office one day when my professor got a call, and I suggested, my Carol is right around the corner. If you get a call like that, why don't you let me take the call? That way, you won't interrupt your research. I figure it's a good way to suck up to the prof. And they said sure, and sure enough, I started. They called out to me whenever a call came in, and I started talking to the people. And after a very short time, it was pretty obvious that people weren't as crazy as I was led to believe, that people were seeing some very unusual things. Certainly I could, explain a good chunk of them. Some turned out to be planes and stars and planets and whatnot. But some people were just seeing some things they couldn't understand. And so I sort of was even more curious. So I started investigating. I went out into the countryside, visiting people in their farms and their homes, traveling around the country. I not only was in Manitoba, went into neighboring provinces. I was down into actually North Dakota and Minnesota many times doing some investigations. And at one point, my prof, I guess it was about a year after that, somebody in the Department of Physics had bowed out of a departmental meeting. And the tradition was that on Friday afternoons, there would be a meeting where people would talk about some of their current research. And it's usually only reserved for graduate students and researchers. Here I was, just an undergrad. But they needed something that was kind of light and fluffy, as they said. Why don't you come and talk about what you've found out about the UFO stuff? So I said, okay, I could give a presentation on what I've learned from people about UFOs. And what the tradition is that you would post the notice of what's going to be on Friday on a bulletin board on the Wednesday. And word spread across campus like wildfire, because apparently people actually did read bulletin boards back then. And my prof came to me and said, unfortunately your talk isn't going to be in the departmental boardroom anymore. We have to move it to a larger venue. And the larger venue turned out to be the largest lecture theater in the entire university. And there was about 500 people there, including television cameras. And it was a bit overwhelming, but it was my immersion by fire into the world of ufology, where I simply talked about what I had learned and what I thought the scientific methodology would be, and explained some cases. And suddenly I found myself as Canada's expert, I suppose, on UFOs.
Oh, wow.
And it was I think just about that time when Alan Hynek, sort of the grandfather of ufology, he came to Canada to want to create a Canadian version of his Centre for UFO Studies. Met with him. He actually stayed over at my place. And then Stan Friedman also came up to Canada and met with him. And, between the influence of the two of them and the experiences I was having investigating, it really was quite a time.
So what were your impressions of Hynek?
Oh, he was a wonderful man. He's, as I say, he's referred to as the grandfather of ufology. And that's kind of what he was. I remember at the time he went into our bedroom to sleep, and when he came out and had left, somebody had come in there and I said, it smells like my grandfather's room. Imagine, because there's that, I can't even define it, but but he was a wonderful man, and I remember he came up to Canada, in fact, to Manitoba, for the 1979 total solar eclipse, the one that was just before the one we had last year. So, and all the astronomers from all across North America and around the world came up to our neck of the woods. And I remember he and I were in his room at the resort where this was taking place on the center line. And we just talked for hours about UFOs. And I remember we were looking off across the field outside the window of his room. And he said, you know what, Chris? A UFO could land right outside the window as we're watching right now. And because we're both into ufology, neither one of us would be believed, because it's that type of phenomenon that the people who are most ardently studying it, if they advance something, they're not going to be believed one way or another. And he was also a very good influence on me in the sense that he was an astronomer, and I was my first degree is in astronomy. And it turns out in my undergraduate years, I wrote a thesis on lunar phenomena, transient lunar phenomena. These are sort of lights and glows and things like that have been seen on the moon. And I was doing it as part of my astronomy research. And when I was doing my research, looking for people who had done previous studies, it turns out that there was a lunar observing program at Corralitos Observatory in the United States that had been carefully cataloging and watching the moon for signs of something a bit out of the ordinary. And who do you think was the director of that program but Joseph Allen Hynek? And so we ended up talking both about astronomy and UFOs. So I'd have to say he was a very interesting influence in my life.
That's incredible. When I was over in Hessdalen, with Erling Strand, he recounted stories of his meeting with Hynek and what an impression that left on him. And that was towards the end of his life when he visited Hessdalen. But that was he certainly sounds like he was a lovely, really brave human being.
Very intelligent, very well-versed, knew his astronomy. In fact, his textbook on astronomy was actually being used at the time in my department. So he knew his stuff, no question.
How incredible. So you met Stan and Stan. Who else has come into your life since you've been studying this that you would really say is a motivator or somebody that you respect?
Oh, wow. Let me see now. I've met a bunch of people. I would have to say that somebody like fairly new on the scene right now is Michael Banias, MJ Banias, who's another Canadian researcher. He's comes at ufology from a philosophical viewpoint, and he's contributed to a few things now, and I think he's working on a book as well. He comments on the nature of reality. He's been in touch with Diane Pasulka and people like that who are sort of gone on the borderlands of how people experience UFOs. So it's quite interesting that there are many people who come and go, many people I respect. Certainly, I've been following your work for quite some time, and I'm quite delighted to finally be speaking with you too.
Well, thank you, and I will never forget the conversation that we had. Oh my gosh, it must have been 4 or 5 years ago. But I called you, and you were nice enough to speak with me, and I was trying to pick your brain because at the time, and it still holds my interest, the anomalous light phenomena, and it was really one of those conversations that was very meaningful and very cool for me. So thank you.
That's great. Well, speaking of another person and calling people up, Earl Bruce Snap, the former op for UFO updates. He was a wonderful man. He was a fantastic interviewer, had an encyclopedic knowledge of UFOs, and he did so much to advance ufology in the sense that, before these types of podcasts, later on in his career, he of course did do some podcasts, but he had this radio show and was running the UFO updates board where people were discussing, and the former UFO updates just attracted everybody and anybody. All the big names were there. Kevin Randall and Friedman were there, often trading comments, as well as people from every group around the world. And there were the people who were contactees and abductees at the same time. And he was just a fantastic individual to be associated with. And when he passed, I was asked to take on the UFO Updates Facebook page after that, because it was felt that I had been involved with such a long time, I might be able to contribute to managing it. So I was very honored to be asked. I'm trying to do my best now as op for the Facebook page for UFO Updates.
And so social media is absolutely, it's a trip. And as you know, there are people that get in there that are pretty nasty. And I think it's I've never seen, you always, you're logical, a critical thinker. I like that. I've never seen you behave like that. But how do you, as a moderator or somebody in the community, how do you try to put a stop to that? Because to me, that is demeaning as the people that they're taking after.
Well, that's a very good question. And I'd have to say that I gained some ability, certainly from watching and experiencing how Earl Knapp handled things, but also because of what one of the other things I do every year is the Canadian UFO Survey. And back in the late 1980s, I was curious about the UFO phenomenon in Canada in terms of how many cases are reported in Western provinces versus Eastern, how many were of red lights, of yellow lights, and so forth, and and all the characteristics. How many were saucers? How many were round? How many were square, and whatnot? But I wanted to know what the distribution was, and at that time there had been no effort by anyone really to keep track of this, and so I started sending out some correspondence to other individuals and organizations across Canada. I could certainly have done it around the world, and I was at that time even publishing a fanzine, a UFO zine, and exchanging with people around the world. Jenny Randalls and I exchanged fanzines and UFO zines for quite some time. Her Northern UFO News is still one of the most interesting ones that I had ever read, and was certainly very influential. But when I started doing just Canada, I wanted to get a picture of what's happening in one country. I'd like to know, at least in our country, we can find out how many cases there are. And the trouble with Canada, or maybe an advantage, is there aren't as many individuals doing UFO research and investigation, whereas there's, 2 or 3 organizations in some states in the United States. There's probably only one UFO organization per province in Canada. In some cases, there are no UFO organizations investigating anymore in some provinces. So it was a little easier to track down who's doing the work. But because the work is being done by only 1 or 2 individuals in a large area, just imagine one researcher in an area the size of Texas, it's hard to investigate so many cases. So I started working with as many people as I could, just getting their UFO data. And this involved, talking with people who, had different views on what the nature of UFOs were. Certainly some were nuts and bolts, some were more psychic researchers, some were more Fortean, certainly some were educated, some were not educated. So I decided I wasn't going to judge. I was just simply going to take the data that I can, deal with it on the lowest common denominator, and try and understand what is actually being seen, working with individuals with very disparate backgrounds and abilities. And so I've been doing that since 1989.
Oh my gosh.
We're almost in our 30th year now, and we actually have acquired somewhere around 15,000 UFO reports in Canada during the past 28, 29 years or something like that, which is actually a little more than Blue Book had at that time. And we have a very good collection of data. And in the process, I've learned to work with a lot of different people. Some people, some organizations just decided to be very, possessive of their cases and wouldn't work with us and collaborate with us. Some were a little easier to work with, and some people were a little hot-headed. But it was just a matter of working with people. So, and I believe the UFO phenomenon, because it's a human phenomenon, it's a phenomenological phenomenon. We're dealing with people's impressions, people's beliefs, people's observations. One has to take that into account. So it's really a sociological phenomenon and a psychological phenomenon. If it's not a physical phenomenon, and in those other two cases, psychological and sociological, it's still worth studying by science. So I think it's something that really can be studied in a number of ways, as long as there's some good methodology.
Excellent. I love, I think it's important, the belief systems, there are so many, and I fall into this too. We all have belief systems based on our personal experiences, and it's hard to separate that. And when I look at, the UFO ufology, it is all guided by people who have belief systems, right or wrong. Most of the time, it's probably wrong. That's a dangerous thing. It's a dangerous thing to look at this and to have a belief that this is all negative or good or from outer space or inner Earth. There's so many, we don't know.
Right. I guess the line I like is everybody has a different opinion, no matter how stupid it is. So it gives you some different perspectives when you start framing things in the fact that people are different.
Yeah, it is. It's a trip. I have learned more about our world, astronomy, geology, and human nature, which I think I could probably have done without, but.
Yeah, and at UFO conferences, I seek out people like Robert Schaefer and people like that, because it's interesting to get a different perspective. And I think that skeptics and debunkers have as much to say and as much relevant discourse on the UFO phenomenon as a lot of the people who are into consciousness raising and walk-ins and things like that.
Absolutely. And I'm going to want to ask you a little bit more about Robert Schaefer when we come back. I'm Erica Lukes here in UFO Classified with Chris A Rutkowski. We will be right back, so stick around.
Stand by. This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. 9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified
with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this.
All systems go.
Tuesdays midday just got a bit more interesting on the KCOR Digital Radio Network as Cheryl Costa returns to the celestial airwaves with Cosmic Questions.
I know. I'm pretty excited about it.
Your 1 hour dose of informative as well as entertaining talk radio. Live every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. We're opening the doors of the unknown just for you.
Oh, that's crazy.
Cosmic Questions, hosted by Cheryl Costa, challenges you to expand your reality of the universe. Join Cheryl Costa as she brings her unique sense of humor and charm to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
It's just good, clean fun.
Every Tuesday, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Cosmic Questions. Finally, the doors of the unknown are opening. Will you be there?
I'm telling you, she is a real ball buster. Hi, Vancouver. George Norrie here, inviting you to join me and producer Tom Danheiser on June 30th at the 4th Annual Architects of the New Paradigm Conference. This will be a groundbreaking, jam-packed event featuring Stephen Bassett, Grant Cameron, Richard Dolan, Daniel Sheehan, Johnny Enoch, and Victor Vigiani. You don't want to miss this one, so watch the 3-minute video and get tickets at anpconference.com. That's anpconference.com. anpconference.com.
It's great. The all-new KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Great. Please make a note of it. It's great.
Alien Deceptions, a suspenseful sci-fi romance thriller by Tina Marie, featuring the tantalizing Erica Jones and the mysterious Russell Hamilton. An out-of-this-world book of fiction based on years of document facts and files the government does not want you to know about. At least, not yet. Alien Deceptions by Tina Marie. Available now at Amazon.com or get a signed copy at TinaMarieEntertainment.com. Get your copy now.
Monday nights are about to become hauntingly good, as Reverend Sean Whittington possesses the airwaves with Vegas Supernatural. Tune in every Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern for Vegas Supernatural, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. There's a war raging between good and evil. The question is, which side are you fighting on? Tune in Monday nights as Reverend Sean Whittington sets the new standard for paranormal radio with some of the most influential personalities in the world today. Vegas Supernatural, hosted by Reverend Sean Whittington, every Monday night at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The one show even the devil doesn't want you to hear.
You're listening to UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts.
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back. I'm Erica Lukes. I was happy to be here and see my friends in chat. I get messages from all over the world every day. And I want you to know I'm reading them, and I apologize if I can't respond, but I appreciate you reaching out to me, and I appreciate your support of the show. On that note, I have to take a moment to say, Northern UFOs, you rock. Thank you for every week getting my radio show out onto YouTube, because I wish I had more time, and so your support means a great deal to me in that regard. I am here today with someone who I have kept my eye on and learned from over the years, and someone who is, I think we could all learn a great deal from. Chris Rutkowski is here, and he's been doing this for decades. He is in Canada, has conducted important research and collected case report after case report, hundreds and actually thousands. And Chris, I look at what you've done and then, watched you interact, and I think it is really admirable that you've taken so much time to devote to acquiring data.
Well, thank you. Those are very kind words, Erica. Yeah, I'm fascinated with the UFO subject, and I think one thing that also distinguishes me is that I'm not out to prove that aliens are here and to prove the UFO phenomenon one thing or another. I actually have a scientific curiosity about it. I'm fascinated with the entire phenomenon, that I'm interested in the UFO reports themselves, trying to understand what it is that people have seen. But I'm also fascinated by the conferences, the things like these podcasts, the literature, a lot of the discourse that goes on and the way that the phenomenon has impacted our society in so many ways. I mean, I'm called upon sometimes to lecture in sociology classes, and I lecture every year to a religion class at universities on the fact that it's a pervasive way of looking at our culture from the perspective of what impact would aliens have on our culture, what would they think, but also how are people interpreting what they're seeing in the skies, and how is that affecting our daily lives. So it really is quite interesting, and I know some people who are involved in ufology are involved because they've seen something. They've had a UFO experience, or that they had somebody in their family who had seen something, or something happened in their neighborhood, or they live in Roswell or something like that. But for me, again, it's really scientific curiosity, and I apply scientific methodology to the field as best I can.
And to me, that is critical. And as I went over to spend time with Erling Strand over in Norway, it was very apparent to me that we can utilize scientific methodology to study this, and we have to. And for whatever reason in America, I think everything has been, it is such an absolute circus. And whether that's because we've got disinformation or misinformation or whatever we've got going on. But it's really unfortunate that when you look at Canada, or you look at Norway or other countries, we can utilize science.
Yeah, and when I was getting into ufology in the 70s, that was just after and just in the middle of what was called the new wave of ufology, or new ufology, which was very British at the time. This was the Jenny Randall's period, Brinsley Lepore Trench, and the John Keels, and it was all. And Vallée, of course, was just starting to publish some of his work by then in the 60s and into the 70s. Where we were having this experiential, it's not just nuts and bolts ufology. There's a psychic component or a Fortean component. And it was very interesting that this influence was so delineated between what was happening in the American experience. And yet, the reports themselves are the basis on all the speculation. In other words, all the UFO reports that are in databases and so forth, and the investigations that are required are necessary to be studied so that you can speculate on what do they mean. So whereas American ufology, the nuts and bolts ufology, was typically, aliens are here and let's try and figure out how they operate. The European New Wave ufology in the 70s was more about what does it mean? How does it relate to us? How can people understand their experiences, understand what's going on in the universe, and that type of thing. And yet without the American experience, I'm calling it an American experience, but it's actually more broadly based than that throughout the entire world. But that nuts and bolts ufology, you do have to investigate, and you do have to say, okay, this case can be explained. This case might be explained. This one sounds an awful lot like it was a star or a planet or a drone or whatnot, because you have to eliminate those types of things out of the data so that you can better understand what the unknowns are. And yet even the ones that are explained have a tremendous impact on people. I'm just in the process right now of going through the 2017 caseload for Canada, and there's somewhere around 1,000 cases that need to be gone through. And after the 200 or 300 reports of going through that, where you get people saying, I saw this light in the sky and it was flashing different colors low on the horizon, and it made me feel so good inside to know I'm not alone in the universe. I watched it for well over 2 or 3 hours, and it was just a fantastic experience to know I was communicating with other entities from another planet. And after investigation, even a cursory investigation, you find out that the person was watching a planet like Venus or Jupiter or something.
Oh, like that. Yeah.
And yet it had an effect on the person. So, I mean, there's that whole side of ufology that explores how UFOs and the idea of alien intervention has impacted us. And then you've got the raw core investigations that are necessary for us to understand what's really going on. And I've actually been called a debunker more often than a believer. Interesting, people, take my criticisms and qualifications and questions, even just questioning some people's comments in Facebook or on Twitter, for example, can get you into a lot of trouble, as you obviously have heard too. It's people, look at me as somebody who's actually, daring to suggest that the emperor has no clothes, and I don't think the emperor, has no clothes whatsoever. I think there's probably some undies there somewhere, maybe a G-string, but that's
comforting. Maybe not.
there is a core that's quite interesting. Out of the thousands of cases that we get every year in Canada, it's a small percentage that remain unexplained, or what I call high-quality unknowns, maybe 1 or 2 or 3%. And it's those ones that I like concentrating on. But unfortunately, the only way to find those cases is to literally go through every case by case, to try and find the ones that really have some meat to them. And it's a long, drawn-out process. As a matter of fact, I'm about 2 months behind in the 27 Canadian UFO survey. We usually have it out sometime March or April, and that's probably going to be at least another month or so before we actually start crunching the data. But it is releasing some interesting information as we go through it. So it's time-consuming work. It's very laborious. It's actually nowhere near as glamorous as the X-Files on TV. Let me put it that way.
Well, I think you might be right about that. But I want to tell people, go to survey.canadianUFOreport.com to check all of this out. It's incredible to read through this. So tell me who is on the team, who is helping you with this?
Oh, there's a number of people. Certainly, MJ Benias is on, works with us. Ashley Kircher helps. Across Canada, we have Jean Cassot. A number of people from Quebec are involved, and in BC, UFO BC contributes. We have contributions that come through. We certainly do look at MUFON Canada, their material when they provide it for us. And there's individuals in other provinces, Trina Lorette in Nova Scotia, for example. So we do work collaboratively. And, with social media, I would say that the number of cases that come in through Twitter and Facebook and YouTube certainly are on the increase. It started fairly small, but it's very common for cases to be reported now in Facebook groups, and a lot of people are uploading things to YouTube. And it's a way to get around the distance factor, as I mentioned. Just imagine 1 or 2 people trying to investigate cases in a large province the size of, Texas or Alaska or something like that, and that's often the case here in Canada. So it's really a collaborative venture, and I really enjoy working with the individuals that do cooperate with us.
And so talking about cooperation, I've heard different things. We had Peter Davenport on the show a couple of weeks ago with Fran Ridge. We hear about how difficult sometimes it is to work with other organizations or researchers to obtain data. What are your thoughts, and what have been your experiences with that?
It's absolutely terrible. At the beginning, it was very easy. I would have to say up until the early 90s, it was quite, we had very good cooperation in working together. But then people got a little bit jealous, a little bit protective of their own data, and stopped contributing. And it was quite a challenge. And then we've gone through waves. There have been many years where we didn't get any one particular group at all, and then suddenly we started again. And then certainly There have been some infighting between some groups who've said that if we're not going to give you our data because you're getting data from that other group and we don't think their data is as good as ours, and that type of thing. Peter, for example, is a wonderful resource. We certainly do go through the National UFO Reporting Center's data for Canadian cases, and I would say a good quarter, maybe, of all cases that we get come from him. One of the biggest problems that we have is investigations. The vast majority of UFO reports that are in any database are just simply not investigated. Some of that has to do with distance. Some of it has to do with lack of thorough information, detailed information on how to contact the individual. Sometimes you have the contact information, you try getting more information through email or whatever, and nobody replies. So it's a big problem. So it's not only a matter of getting cooperation from the organizations and the individuals doing the studies and investigating, but it's sometimes a problem in the cases themselves. So it's a very, very difficult process.
Well, and for me, when I was state director for MUFON, it was interesting because I would just go through the database. I mean, just endlessly trying to see what I could find and reach out to other state directors where I felt they had relevant sightings, and was hoping in some way we could work together to kind of streamline the process. And it was really a little bit shocking to me to see that, I think because there were so many people that were investigating that had different levels of training or belief systems, to see how cases were or weren't investigated. And that really affected things. I know Bob Spearing, who was helping me do work on Project Orange, he had to go through and basically investigate every case again because of the lack of quality or understanding that was seen by some investigators.
Absolutely. And, one of the big problems is that there's no absolute standards. I know that in abduction research, David Gottlieb, for example, had come up with a code of practice and guidelines for investigating abduction cases. And he was almost completely ignored, and I don't think maybe only one or two people signed on to that. In ufology, it's much more difficult, although certain organizations like MUFON, have field investigator training and manuals and so forth, and they do some tests. But sometimes it's not as rigorous as needed. Sometimes people are just simply not good at taking tests, even though they're very good investigators. So it's it's a very, very difficult situation. You can't go out and get a degree in ufology. People sometimes ask me, well, what should I go into in university? And I say, wow, virtually anything, as long as you get some good scientific methodology, because you can approach ufology from the perspective of astronomy, although I would argue that astronomers probably aren't any more capable than any other field, because most of the astronomers I do spend a lot of time in front of computers using remote telescopes, or the amateurs spend a lot of time at their scopes trying to get nice photos of Jupiter and Saturn and some nebulas and things like that. And things that are happening in the immediate environment, like a close encounter 150 yards away or whatever. How would an astronomer know any better in terms of investigation and studying than anyone else? So I would argue scientific methodology, good observations, psychology, sociology, certainly religion, engineering, and so forth. So there's a number of fields that would be worthwhile getting. And some people are just better than others. It's like training for managers. We joke about this when we're dealing with our bureaucrats in the various universities and colleges, that sometimes people will go for managerial training for just 2 or 3 weeks at a time and get their certificate that says that they're very good managers, and yet they're possibly the worst managers of personnel and design that we've ever experienced. Some people just don't have it, despite the piece of paper that they have that says they're good at it. And
it is interesting because people have such different ways of of looking at things. I mean, I think for me, some of my strengths are looking at the broader picture, whereas some researchers, I mean, it's this very fine-tooth comb breaking everything down. And so we each have strengths and weaknesses that we have to learn to utilize. But for me, one of the greatest gifts of entering this field is the fact that I've learned so much about many other things. And I love that. I mean, I've got 2 telescopes. I love getting out there with my friends and learning about astronomy. I love learning about geology, religion. I am absolutely blown away as I look into some of this with relation to the Mormon Church. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, it's a never-ending process, and it really, truly is the coolest, most gratifying thing I've ever done. Even though it's kind of a pain sometimes, but.
Yeah, somewhere, I think I even have it online, maybe on my blog somewhere, that I made a list of scientific fields in which you can study ufology without studying ufology. It ranges everything from atmospheric optics to physics to math to engineering to trying to how to teach kids how to get them motivated in science, but along the way teach them things about ufology. I sometimes judge school science fairs, and in some of them there's instead of a regular 3 boards in a volcano, sometimes people teachers get their students to imagine an alien. And the idea is that just to assume that there's an alien living on, for example, Mars. What would it look like? How would it breathe, since we know the Martian atmosphere is so thin? What would it eat on Mars? Does it have 2 legs or 10 or none? How does it see? How does it communicate? Why would its head be so far off the ground and not close to its feet? Things like that. And you get kids trying to understand the physiology and the physiognomy, I suppose, of aliens. And in that way, you get a better understanding of who we are and how we got here. But in the process, you can use that knowledge to apply it to cases where people have said they've seen aliens. Why would the aliens have to look like the way they are, according to that individual? Why would they speak the way they do? Or why would they, travel between stars in a ship that looks like that and not like this? So there's many ways of approaching ufology scientifically. And not all of them have to do with UFO reports.
Oh, isn't that? I love it. I love it. I love it. We're going to I need to pick your brain on some things. So prepare yourself. I might be calling you. I love it. It's so cool. And I have a question from Northern UFOs. He wants to know if you think that there is more reported than unreported cases. He says in his area from interviews, he's running at 100% unreported. In other words, the first person that they conveyed their experiences to, and I'm probably reading this the wrong way, but anyway, he thinks anonymous surveys would prove that point. Do you know of any surveys in the U.S. or Canada that were done this way?
Oh, yeah. As a matter of fact, a number of surveys have asked that question. In fact, we did a survey in Canada that was following on the heels of some Gallup polls to find out. First, the question is, you ask, has anybody seen a UFO? And, you get whatever percentage. Usually it's about 10% of the population believe they've seen UFOs. That's across North America, both the United States and Canada. You ask the next question, and Stan Friedman actually asked this question too, as did Hynek. How many of you reported your UFO? And the hands immediately go down. And it turns out that it's somewhere around 10%, probably a little bit less than that. Let's say 5 to 10% have actually reported their UFOs. So 1% of all UFOs get reported, and 10% of all UFOs that are seen get reported. And if you look at the population, you can do the calculations that show that it's still a significant number, but there still is a stigma attached to reporting UFOs. But at the same time, you go to a party or you go to a bar or somewhere and you bring up the subject of UFOs, and I would imagine that most times people would say, my cousin saw something last week, or I saw something when I was a kid, or there's a story going around my family that crazy Uncle Willie actually saw something and something took him aboard. Or, the conversation is a great starter in that sense, and you can get some really good information, but it's affected our, entire society in so many ways. I mean, aliens and UFOs are, often depicted in TV commercials. A lot of TV shows themselves have aliens in them. So it's a big part of our culture, and many people have experiences but are really hesitant to come forward because they still think that so few people see them.
And isn't that interesting? For me, being here in Utah, it has been so difficult to form a cohesive network where you're getting people together to get to share information. And that really, it's hard because so many people are deeply affected by what they see. They've been criticized. And I have to think of the situation that happened with my friend Chris Bledsoe. And I watched and saw what MUFON, unfortunately, certain people at MUFON did and how they behaved with regard to he and his family. And it was so tragic to see that this is the way people are treated. But I just, we've got to, I don't know. Anyway, it was just an interesting thing. So I commend you for doing all of the work that you've done and for the ability to sit back and to deal with different personalities and different levels of education. I think that's really cool, and maybe you can teach me some things.
Maybe. I'm not sure about that, but maybe.
Are you saying you might not be up for that job? I know it sounds like I could pay you extra.
Maybe. I mean, you have a good background. You've talked with a lot of interesting people. You've had your own fascinating experiences in dealing with phenomena. So, I certainly do. I do teach. I do teach courses at college and in extended education and things like that. I think the important thing is, as long as the desire for knowledge is there, people are teachable. If people don't have a desire for knowledge and they already know the answers, then it's very hard to teach them.
Absolutely. That is great. I am Erica Lukes on UFO Classified here with Chris Rutkowski. We will be right back.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the Digital Radio Network, broadcasting from a shack just south of Area 51.
Wait, that doesn't exist.
This is the KCOR Digital Radio Network. Now for the news.
Now, broadcasting in digital HD radio.
This landed at a ranch at Corona, New Mexico. The rancher turned it over to the Air Force. Rancher W.W. Brazil was the man who discovered the saucer.
What I thought was a star began coming in my direction at a very rapid rate of speed.
The unidentified object, which some sources thought might be a blimp, moved slowly down the Pacific coast from Santa Monica and disappeared south of Long Beach.
I saw a UFO, and it went down the river, turned right at the United Nations, turned left, and then down the river.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
No more plausible deniability. Fact, fiction, or the truth. You decide. And now, the new voice of the high desert, the hostess of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Erica Lukes. Always happy to be here on a wonderful Friday night on KCOR. I want to give a shout out to my producer and station owner, Tina Marie, for having a wonderful network. I love being here on Friday night and kicking everything off. Willie Miranda will be up next. And then, of course, Tina Marie with Restricted Airspace, Hyperspace with Solaris Blue Raven. I want to also thank all of you for getting in chat every week, for talking about food, for making me hungry, for making me think and asking good questions. I love it. Keep it up. And please spread the word about UFO Classified. I truly try to bring on people who I feel have significant things to offer all of us. I am here with one of those people who I hold in high regard, Chris A Rutkowski, who is a Canadian science writer, educator, and has been on many different TV shows, radio shows. You can go to survey.canadianuforeport.com to learn more about his work. And Chris, welcome back. I want to, there's so many questions I want to ask you, but one question that is very curious to me as of late is the role of religion in ufology.
Yes. Well, I certainly have got myself in some hot water over a chapter that I wrote for reframing the debate, the book about a new way of looking at ufology. And as I mentioned in an earlier segment, I have actually been invited every year for quite a number of years now to speak at a class on religion about New Age religion, specifically UFO religions, and their impact and their spread. And I think what I've seen in ufology is that people are religious about what they think and believe in terms of UFOs. And when I say religious, it's not a capital R, it's a small r, in the sense that people hold on to their beliefs. And, belief is something that it doesn't require proof if you're holding on to it. It's something that you have faith in. And there's a lot of people who are involved and fascinated with UFOs who believe that the aliens are really here. And some of them believe that we're in touch with the Galactic Command and Control Center, Mark Age. There's so many, organizations believe in the spirituality aspect. We've gone through Adamski, we've gone through everything from the Solar Temple to Hale Bopp and Bowen Peep and things like that. We've seen how belief in UFOs can be damaging. We've seen how people are ardent in their beliefs about UFOs. And I think it's really rapidly becoming more of an issue that at one time, and I make this point in some of my writings, that, people are talking about we're living in the modern era, and people say we've gone past the modern era of ufology into the postmodern era, whether it's ufology or art or music or anything like that. Postmodern art is very freaky indeed. And most philosophers and sociologists can say that we've actually passed postmodernism and we're now in what's called metamodernism. And metamodernism is, for lack of a better way to describe it, is anything goes. There's no real expert. My experience is as valid as yours. My view is as valid as yours. And it actually does tie in with what's going on in some political circles, that truth is being rewritten. Truth can come in various flavors. And there's no absolutes anymore. Anything is possible. If you grant that anything is possible, then perhaps everything is possible. And it's hard to pin down exactly what is real and what isn't in the opinions of a lot of people. The problem with that view is that there are some absolute truths that if you're listening to this podcast on, let's say, a cell phone or a tablet, the cell phone or tablet will not, in the next 10 seconds, turn into a blue butterfly in your hand and fly away. Is it possible that it could do it? I suppose it's possible. I mean, if it's very highly improbable, but if you allow that anything is possible, then it's possible. but it's not going to do that because there are some absolutes. We're talking right now using a technology that's very real. I mean, there are ways of understanding how the electronics work, how electromagnetism works, how the web works, and so forth. And all of that is developed through science. If you're reading, some literature in a room with a lamp that's on, the electrons do perform under certain ways, and science and engineering work very well, thank you. But if you go beyond that to say, there's some things that science doesn't know. Well, yes, that's true. And it's good to grasp some of it, and it's good to try and explore, where the boundaries are that science doesn't know and where something else takes over. But until that point, science really does work quite well. And the problem is that some people use that belief to say, okay, well, if science works and some of this other stuff like UFOs, can't be studied by science, then it's not real at all and it's all nonsense. And that's the rejection based on a scientific faith. So I think that somewhere in between believing that anything is possible and everything's possible and believing that only what we already know is possible is a middle ground that needs to be explored and understood a little bit more. And some people have taken this into a very religious viewpoint that, they say, well, the aliens that contacted me yesterday are using a very, advanced science that we don't understand yet. And that's how they are able to download numbers and messages and things like that. You mentioned Bledsoe and others, and this is how we get this information. On the other hand, we do know that if there are aliens out there, the chances are that they are much more advanced than we are, and who knows what technology and advances could be required. As an astronomer, and my astronomy colleagues agree with me, that there probably is life out there. It's the traveling between the stars that is the problem. And right now, we don't know of any way of traveling easily between stars. We don't know any way to bend space and time. There's lots of theoretical things. You mentioned Eric Davis. There's lots of theories about how to do it. But in terms of science and engineering and in practical terms, we just don't know. And yet, the analogy of the cell phone, if you have a cell phone in your hand, 50 years ago, you wouldn't have been communicating with a cell phone. That was simply not how the technology was available back then. Well, what would we be using in our hands or without our hands 50 years from now? What method would we be communicating with 100 years from now, 1,000 years from now? And our sun is a pretty average star in one of the outer spiral arms of our galaxy. It's about halfway through its lifetime, give or take. And there are stars that are much older than our sun and stars that are much younger than our sun. If you assume that life is prevalent throughout the galaxy at a certain ratio, let's say we're an average type of star system with some planets in which some life forms. Well, if you say that, there's going to be other stars out there that are a little bit older than our sun, well, maybe there's a planet around one of those stars that's a little bit older than our sun that has a little bit of a jump start on us. Not just 100 years or 1,000 years, but let's be, conservative and say 500,000 years. Well, if life evolved and the civilization evolved on a planet around a fairly advanced star system that's 500,000 years advanced than us, they may have been able to figure out not new physics, but ways to use physics in ways that we can't possibly understand right now. And I can't even begin to imagine what a cell phone or the equivalent of communicating between two people or creatures would be like 500,000 years advanced from now. So advances are possible. Science is still making advances on the theoretical level and on the physical level. And there are ways of describing in very scientific terms how things function. I think you have to remain rooted in that while at the same time being open to a lot of different possibilities. And I think there's a lot of what I described in some of my papers as UFO zealots who are convinced that aliens are downloading information, that they are communicating information in ways that we simply don't understand, that they're walking through dimensions, that they're opening wormholes in people's walls and things like that. And it's possible. It's wildly improbable, and we don't see any science for it. And I think it's important that we have to take a look at both sides, step back a bit. Sometimes we're too close to the problem and too close to some of the phenomena and the experiences to be able to say, you know what, maybe not. Maybe there's another explanation.
And that is absolutely right. And we do, especially with those of us who are investing so much time into this, sometimes you do get too close and you have to step back for a lot of different reasons. But I want to ask you, because you're talking about, wormholes and portals and different things. And as we have seen, there is, there's a lot of interesting things taking place right now with To the Stars, with Ron Pandolfi, Joe Firmage, all of these different factions that are getting putting information out. What is your take on all of this?
Yeah, well, I have to say I'm in the doubting Thomas category for all of this. I know I've read some of the papers from Davis. I've seen Putoff's papers. I know that some people have some inside information from having been involved in CIA and defense contracts and so forth. In putting into perspective, though, I haven't seen anything that is really, really convincing, really impressive yet. I've looked at the Tic Tac videos and the gimbal videos and whatnot. I've listened to the testimony of some pilots. And, we've had testimonies from pilots before who have seen some remarkable things. The testimonies don't seem to match what's on the videos. And when you start getting down to questions about, well, what's the name of the project? We even had the name wrong. And how come, Freedom of Information Act requests can't produce any more information? And you get into things like hot dog carts and a whole series of things that really aren't making any sense. And is there really some money being funneled here and into there? And I'm a little uncomfortable. I still need to see some meat, and at this point, I'm not seeing a lot of meat yet. So, yeah, I think it's really good. I think some people are arguing that TTSA has, promoted ufology in the mainstream media. It has been promoted in mainstream media before. That's why we did have Blue Book and Condon and X-Files on TV and things like that. And in Canada, we're frequently on television and radio. As a matter of fact, tonight I'm on, while I'm on this podcast, I'm on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation on a recorded show talking about UFOs nationally. So I think this has always been going on. Has it raised people's awareness? Probably, but I think the fact that there's so much confusion and so many cards being played very close to people's vests that I think there may be some damage being done now, because there hasn't been a lot of openness.
And I absolutely agree, and I think I do commend, when they came out, to see CNN or to see Fox News or, all of these news sources really stepping back and taking a look at this seriously. Here in America, that was a feat. That was really, really cool. I do respect the work of Putoff and many of the people that are involved in To the Stars Academy. I do, like you say, I question, what is, at the end of the day, what is the motivation? I keep hearing Luis Elizondo talking about the threat. And to me, okay, if we're going to use that wording, and granted, I understand that he works with the military, and that's commonplace, but give us, why is this a threat? We need more here.
Well, especially since the spokesperson for the Pentagon stated that the project was shut down in 2012 because there were other priorities. Well, if UFOs are a real threat, then what other priority could there be? I mean, a threat is a threat. So, that doesn't make any sense either. And in terms of CNN, things like that, I mean, I think it's about 10 years, 15 years ago now, where our Canadian UFO report was mentioned by David Letterman. So,
that is rad.
And the Weekly World News quoted me. So, I think that media are very interesting. In fact, some of the media stories on UFOs have always fascinated me. Strentz's report on his PhD thesis on UFOs remains one of the most fascinating works ever done. And there have been a number of studies on the influence of the media on UFOs and vice versa. As a matter of fact, the CBC radio show that's on right now opposite us is about a PhD thesis that's being done here in Canada by a historian. And one of the aspects that he's looking at is the role of the media in ufology. I have some of this documented, by the way, on my blog. The survey .canadianUFOreport.com website is specifically about the Canadian UFO survey, and it only is updated once a year when we do the survey. But my blog is actually uforum, UFORUM.blogspot.com. And I fairly recently posted some Canadian government documents that I found in the UFO files in the National Archives. I'm trying to remember if it was 1965 or something like that where the documents come from. But it was all about how the Canadian Air Force was dealing with reports of UFOs and inquiries from media. And there actually is documentation between some administrators and majors and and corporals and so forth deciding on what they should actually tell the media and how they should work with the media. And in this particular set of documents, it was decided not to cooperate with the media. We actually have that documented. So the history of government relations and UFOs and military influence in UFOs and media is a fascinating subject, and I think it's definitely worth investigating. I think that certainly the intent of the To the Stars Academy is good. It may be something as simple as a think tank, and out of think tanks do come some very interesting information. I mean, Eric Davis's papers are fairly interesting in terms of theoretical ways of traveling through time and space and wormholes and so forth. I have in my library, I have a collection of papers that have been written theoretically about UFOs and advanced physics. There's a classic one from 1978, I think, by Alan Holt, who is a researcher, a physicist who got a contract from NASA. And it's actually a NASA publication on space-time fields and how to travel through space using a number of theoretical concepts that Eric Davis talks about. And there's even a photo or an image, a drawing of Alan Holt's concept of what a spacecraft traveling using these electromagnetic fields looks like, and it looks like a flying saucer. So there have been papers like that have been theoretical and fascinating that have been produced over the years. The ones produced by Davis and Puthoff over the past number, relatively recently, are part of this, and they do lead to some scientific advanced concepts. So I think the government and the military are necessarily studying advanced propulsion concept because it's what they need, and if another country comes up with propulsion before they do, it's going to be a problem. So I think it's an interesting way around studying ufology by studying advanced propulsion, quantum effects, and so forth. So it kind of goes along with what I had said before. There's ways of injecting UFOs into ordinary physics and ordinary science because it's a way of understanding our universe. And we live in the Steven Spielberg era. We talk about what ifs and what's possible. We see on movie screens and TV screens things flying through the universe at high speed and warp speed and so forth. Well, that may be in the future, but it has to start somewhere.
Oh, wow. Thank you. That's incredible. And I have to ask you too, because when I think about the To the Stars Academy and some of the reasons, George Knapp has done a few interviews with Harry Reid and Luis Elizondo. And in those interviews, there are little teeny snippets of Harry Reid saying, or George Knapp saying, that the reason funding was cut off was because of a group of ultra-conservatives that thought that this was demonic in nature.
Oh, yes. Well, that goes back to religion, that people have their beliefs. I still get comments from people who say that that my investigations into UFOs, may lead to, demonic possession, or it's because the devil is guiding me astray and that type of thing. So, hey, it's been around a long time. I think Tyler or Terrell had a book on UFOs and Satan. So it's something that's still prevalent in our society.
So do you feel that there's any validity to any of that?
Like Satan?
Well, it's Satan. No, just to the fact that we're dealing with something that is perhaps demonic in nature.
I don't think so. And one of the reasons is because when I'm investigating UFOs and I can explain a good chunk of the UFO reports, that really has no bearing on a spiritual orientation. It's just the facts, ma'am. Now, there are some cases where people are convinced that Satan has been affecting their lives and controlling their lives and so forth. And I've worked with abductees and contactees over the course of my research. And in many cases, I do find myself referring them to psychologists or religious leaders because it seems more appropriate for some of that rather than the nuts and bolts stuff. It's just a matter of the perspective of the witness and what use there can be.
Right, absolutely. Thank you. I am Erica Lukes here with Chris Rutkowski, and you can go to uforum.blogspot.ca to learn more about him and look at the blogs. There's some really cool stuff on here, including a great picture of you, Chris. I love it. We will be right back.
Stand by.
This is UFO Classified with Erica Lukes.
Erica Lukes.
The phone lines are open now at 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio. More UFO Classified.
UFO Classified
with Erica Lukes on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. After this. There is a world outside that which we live in, a realm where fact and fiction collide. The Paradigm Matrix.
The Paradigm Matrix.
Hosted by Willie Miranda every Friday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern.
The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us, even now in this very room.
The 1 hour show that will surely leave you hanging on the edge of the rabbit hole.
The Paradigm Matrix
explores a universe of topics from UFOs, cryptozoology, conspiracies, as well as all things paranormal.
Enter a world of the twisted and deformed.
Friday night, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. The Paradigm Matrix. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network, where fact and fiction collide. This is the world-famous KCOR.
That's the only station I listen to.
All systems go.
Tuesdays midday just got a bit more interesting on the KCOR Digital Radio Network as Cheryl Costa returns to the celestial airwaves with Cosmic Questions.
I know. I'm pretty excited about it.
Your 1 hour dose of informative as well as entertaining talk radio. Live every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. We're opening the doors of the unknown just for you.
Oh, that's crazy.
Cosmic Questions, hosted by Cheryl Costa, challenges you to expand your reality of the universe. Join Cheryl Costa as she brings her unique sense of humor and charm to the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
It's just good, clean fun.
Every Tuesday, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern. Cosmic Questions. Finally, the doors of the unknown are opening. Will you be there?
I'm telling you, she is a real ball buster.
Friday night, 9 p.m. Pacific. Jump onto the Celestial Highway and travel at the speed of light. Into hyperspace. Hyperspace. Hosted by Solaris Blue Raven. She navigates you through the cosmic tides of mysticism into the world of covert technology, UFOs, mystical sciences, and the world of unforeseen forces.
You get to really sort of enjoy a bizarre ride.
Listen live, Friday night, 9 p.m. Pacific, for Hyperspace, the one show that blows the whistle off our government black ops projects. Hyperspace, hosted by Solaris Blue Raven. Exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network.
Want to take a ride?
You're listening to
UFO Classified with Erica Lukes, where the truth isn't hidden beneath the black lines of a Sharpie.
That's the craziest thing I've ever heard.
To be on with Erica, call 702-425-9230. That's 702-425-9230. Worldwide callers use Skype name KCOR Radio.
Radio contact.
Share your thoughts on the show on Twitter by using hashtag KCOR. Or head over to the live chats at KCORradio.com.
The audience goes nuts.
And now, your host of UFO Classified.
Are you ready?
Erica Lukes.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for tuning into UFO Classified. I am always thrilled to be here, and every show, in my opinion, keeps getting better and better. I love it. And I want to give a shout out to my friends, Tina Marie, who is exceptional, Northern UFOs. Thank you so much. Thanks all of you for being here. A shout out to David Cook, who has a show here on my network on Sundays. So make sure you listen. Willie Miranda will be coming up next, and then Tina Marie and Solaris Blue Raven. So you can stick around for a great night on KCOR. I am absolutely thrilled to be here tonight with Chris A Rutkowski, who has contributed a great deal and has been in this since the 70s. Is that seriously right?
Yes, unfortunately it is. I guess I started investigating cases properly in 1975. And I guess in 1974, I was actually in high school, and I had a UFO club. So I was delighted that there was a flap in 1975 that I was able to investigate.
Oh, I love that. So have you ever personally seen anything or had any unusual experiences?
Well, I'll say no, although there's an interesting caveat here. I've been going through the National Archives of Canada, and one of the things I'm fascinated with is to go through the history. And in Canada, we do have a really good record. This whole thing about disclosure is kind of moot in Canada because the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and the National Research Council have been investigating UFOs since the 40s. In various ways, and the files have been gone into the National Archives of Canada and have been constantly accessible by the public. And I've been to Ottawa a number of times to look through the archives and found some fascinating cases. But the files are currently available, and so unlike the United States, we do have a continuous record of the UFO reports that are online right from the 40s up to present day. So, but in the archives, I found the 1977 cases that were filed with the National Research Council, and you can look at a lot of these online too now. They're very readily accessible. The National Archives has actually digitized 15,000 pages of documents. And in 1977, I was looking through the list, and I'm going through case by case by case, and then I came across a case by Chris A Rutkowski in Winnipeg, Canada. And I was looking, and I think, what the heck is this? And sure enough, and I had a vague recollection that in 1977, because there are a lot of UFO reports being seen and reported to a number of agencies, including the National Research Council, I wanted to know what happens to the reports. So, I was driving home from an investigation outside of the city, and I saw an interesting light in the sky, and I was looking at it, and it didn't seem to be an aircraft, and it didn't seem to be a satellite, because I went through my usual escalation of hypotheses. What is this thing that I'm seeing? And I couldn't ascribe it to anything, but I figured, okay, well, I'll report it. And I reported it to the National Research Council and completely forgot about it. And in retrospect, it turned out that I think it actually was an aircraft that was coming in for a landing at an airstrip seen from an odd angle. It certainly wasn't a saucer; it was simply a light. But I completely forgot about it, and I found my report in the archives. So on record, I actually have recorded as having seen a UFO, yes, even though it didn't make an impression on me at the time.
That is awesome. So, I mean, with the anomalous light phenomenon, because this is an area of interest for me, are there areas in Canada that seem to have window areas or hot spots where they seem to have a lot of activity with regard to this? And what is your take on that?
Well, yes, in a lot of ways, in the sense that one of the things the Canadian UFO Survey does, it allows us to see if there are more UFOs in a certain area than any others. Are there more in Saskatchewan than in Nova Scotia, for example, things like that. And you can break it down for smaller regions as well. And it turns out that it's not a consistent pattern, that every year there seems to be a different area of the country that has more UFOs for whatever reason. And some hotspots one year may be completely barren in another year. So there are some. On the other hand, there are a number of places where, the ghost lights are often seen, Brown Mountain and Marfa and places like that. Well, Canada has a bunch of those up here as well. In fact, there's one in Manitoba called the Sperling Light, which is a light seen at the end of a road, seen to hover and dance around and so forth. And another one called Woodridge, where a UFO again has an interesting story attached to it, where it was seen back in the 30s, I think, for the first time that was recorded. And the story is that at that time there weren't a lot of roads, and a fellow was walking home from a bar, and there had been a road through the bush at that time, so he was walking home along the railroad track, got a little tired because he was a little bit tipsy, fell asleep with his head on the railroad track, and sure enough, the 509 came by, and that was that. But apparently, as the story goes, his ghost is carrying a lantern up and down the railroad track to this very day looking for his head. And this tells us a couple of things. Number one, it shows the connection between UFOs and other paranormal phenomena, which is something I've explored in a couple of books. But also that, it shows that the phenomenon has been around for quite some time, and the Woodridge light has been seen for decades, and even supposedly to this day. So there's a lot of places in Canada where those things have been seen. Now, we did take an atmospheric physicist out to the Sperling Light one time, And he described it as a classic atmospheric refraction, of lights distant and so forth. So, I mean, there's a possibility that, most of the lights are that type of thing, but then you get some people who've had some close encounters, and that sort of rules that type of thing out. So, yeah, there are many, lights, areas where lights are seen. Current hot spots. There are a lot of cases in Quebec. In fact, I would say right now about half of all the UFOs reported in Canada are from Quebec. Why that's so, I don't know. It used to be British Columbia, used to have the lion's share of UFO reports. Right now it seems to be Quebec and certain regions of Quebec. I just did a second season of a TV show up here in Canada called Indians and Aliens, produced by an Aboriginal television network. And the intent of the show actually started because as the Canadian North has been opened up by running transmission lines from some of the dams that have been built in the far north, access to some Indigenous and First Nations communities has opened up, and communication has gotten a little bit better. And some of the workers and some of the Indigenous people have been talking about some of the strange things that have been happening in Canada's far north. And so about 5 years ago, there were so many UFO reports coming out of a fairly isolated region of the Canada's north that it was a hotspot for a while. So it really is interesting to see how the reports themselves can vary and how trends can come and go.
So what are, with some of these hotspots, window areas, what are some of the commonalities?
Well, certainly, I'm trying to think of some of the ones in the far Canadian north. In Quebec, for example, there's a highway called, I think it's 701 or 709, and that was the name of the original TV series. But a person said he was walking between houses, and he saw a glowing blue disc-shaped object moving slowly over the houses from one transmission pole to another, as if we're talking about plasmas and things like that. Although he said this seemed to be a physical object that just suddenly seemed to disappear, and it was glowing, and yet he said it was definitely there. Other people have reported glowing balls of light. The commonalities are typical reports are lights usually white in color. They seem to be the most prevalent color. Seen around 11 o'clock at night. Usually it's not just one person. Usually there's two people who are seeing the same thing together. In other words, somebody sees it and gives her companion a nudge in the ribs with an elbow and saying, "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" That adds some credibility to what's being reported. And usually the duration is somewhere in the neighborhood of about a minute, something like that. And that's long enough to decide whether something is a star or planet or satellite and not. So there are some interesting characteristics and commonalities that we come out of looking physically at the UFO reports themselves. When you start looking at hundreds and thousands of cases, you do tend to see some trends.
And so, what about the geography?
Well. Certainly water, and I know I can't remember the fellow's name now who does the research about UFOs and water, but he has a very fascinating collection of cases like that. Water is a big part of it. A large part of the Precambrian Shield in Canada. That's mostly Ontario and Quebec, although certainly parts in Manitoba. Very rocky. Very sparse population. Interesting. One of the cases, and the one that's described in this operetta, and the case that's on the other podcast, the case of Falcon Lake, where a fellow was burned by a flying saucer, to lack any other description. The site is in the Precambrian Shield, and this saucer was seen to land on a flat rock outcropping. In which there's a lot of quartz veins running through it. In fact, the witness had been looking for silver and gold and copper in some areas because of the geology that he was investigating. And when this saucer took off, it burned him, and the case was investigated by the Canadian military. The United States Air Force Condon Report came up to investigate. It was investigated by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and neither the Royal Canadian Mounted Police nor the Canadian forces had an explanation. And what's interesting, because we have these documents, and I mentioned again, we have the archives. In archives, we've found literally hundreds of documents about this particular case and the investigations carried out by the police and the military. And it's very interesting to see, how seriously this was taken and how much in depth the reports are. Therethe detailed interviews, interrogations of the witness, and the transcripts of interrogations with the people who worked at the motel where this guy was staying while he was in the area, the maid who cleaned his room, the bartender, and so forth. And it's fascinating to see how in depth the investigations are. And I know this is a fascinating case that has stood the test of time.
And that is a really interesting case. I had a case where there was a woman, she is in her 80s here in Utah, close to Skinwalker Ranch, actually. And when she was in her 40s, she wandered away from her group and she had missing time. People were looking for her frantically, and then she had radiation burns on her. And so, I mean, there's so many interesting cases like this, but I want to get to a question that one of our people in chat asked you, and this is from CI Phil. As a member of SCU, is there anything that you can share that you're working on currently?
Well, SCU, of course, is the Scientific Coalition for Ufology, and it's a group of scientists and other individuals who got together to sort of take a really cold, hard look at some UFO evidence, and I'm part of a couple of working groups on how to even define UFOs. How do you evaluate what is a good UFO case? What are the quantitative criteria for deciding whether a case is good or not? And a number of individuals like Isaac Coy and people like that have done some amazing work in defining this. And so they're trying to standardize UFO investigations and standardize trying to understand reports. Even an exercise in trying to identify the best UFO cases, not the most popular UFO cases, but the best UFO cases. And for example, Roswell is identified by a lot of people as the premier UFO case. And yet, it's probably the weakest UFO case in any list because, you think of a typical UFO report where somebody sees a UFO on a certain date at a certain time, and you can talk to the witness, and it's associated with an observation, and a drawing can be made or something like that. Well, in terms of Roswell, we're not even sure what date it occurred. We kind of think it's somewhere around the beginning of July when there was a thunderstorm and people had seen some lights, and there was some debris found, but the debris is not around anymore. The witnesses have all passed away, and there's conflicting reports of what actually was seen. Whether we can actually connect a UFO to the debris is a matter of debate. So it's actually not even a very good case in that sense, whereas in the case of the report that I just was talking about up here in Canada, Falcon Lake, where the fellow was burned by something over the quartz vein, there was in fact radioactive material found at the site, radioactive silver that was found inside the rock that this UFO was said to hover. We still have those pieces. In fact, there's one sitting in my library here that we've been testing ourselves, which has been tested thoroughly by the University of Colorado, University of Illinois, Atomic Energy of Canada, and we can verify that it is radioactive. It is very unusual, and we still have these pieces. What can we say about Roswell? I mean, I know that Diane Pasulka and a few others are saying, and especially TTSA are saying, and Jacques Vallée are saying that they have pieces from Ubatuba and possibly Roswell as well, but can we actually connect them to that? What's the provenance? So it's a matter of trying to understand where are the really good cases coming from, and how do we as scientists examine the UFO phenomenon, in a way that we can actually present to colleagues. If we're going to present at a scientific conference, these are the best cases, and this is why we think that UFO research is valid. Give me your best evidence. And, that's not the easiest thing to come up with.
Right. And I have to ask you, have you been, because we've heard of different groups or people who have a vested interest in this, approaching people, researchers, organizations to acquire data. Have you or has anybody in your group been approached by some of these individuals?
Well, I mean, certainly Bigelow contacted me when I was at the MUFON conference in 2007 or 9, somewhere in there. And I'd given a presentation, and he talked with me afterwards about, if a good case came, can I give him the first crack of his team to investigate and cooperate in terms of data and so forth. So certainly, he was certainly one individual who did. I know that he also approached Brian Veik, who had run the Houston UFO research group for quite a number of years, and is now out of the field. But there was an attempt to purchase all of Brian Veik's UFO data on CD or disc or something like that. So there have been a number of people who have been approached. And as far as sharing UFO data, I think it's a great idea. I'd like to see a more universal spread of sharing data, if we can at least agree on what the parameters are and how do you classify these things. Even my Canadian UFO survey, I have a certain series of data points that I'd like for each particular case, and people have said, why don't you include this, or why do you include that instead of this, and maybe your classification scheme is wrong. Well, if people can't even decide on how to collect the data, how are we possibly to make any strides in understanding how to crunch the data?
Right, absolutely. And to me, that's been really interesting to see how, organizations like MUFON have clamped down, and now you have to have the secret decoder ring, or you have to be a member and whatever that means to look at all the cases. And even then, and I've mentioned this multiple times, even as state director, there were cases that I went in there to find pretty important cases that, well, guess what? There was a lot of information that was not in there. It was, who knows where that went. So that to me, that's disturbing. I really respect Erling Strand and Project Hessholland, because when they get, they're sharing the data, and we have to do that if we're going to make any progress.
Absolutely, and a lot of the good advancement, like the Canadian UFO Survey, is one of only a handful of such studies around the world. Certainly Italy and the Scandinavians and the French are doing a lot of that, and the data is being made available. Peter Davenport's site is really a good resource for looking at UFO cases. We certainly get a lot of information from that. UFO Info, and organizations like that, where there is a good information sharing. And I think it's important that we do have access to that proprietary information is not the way to go. And seeing that, a lot of the discussions these days are around what appears to be a proprietary investigation and study of UFOs, is causing more confusion and, muddying the field even more than it already is. And not just internally from within ufology is it looking bad, but from the outside, debunkers are certainly having a field day, because there's so many things to point at and laugh.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I forgot to bring up Robert Schaefer. And I have to tell you that at every conference I'm at where he is, I gravitate towards him and we sit and talk and I make him sing opera and we have a great time. So really, I mean, it is interesting. I've loved meeting some of these colorful people in this, whether they're skeptical or whatever the opinion is. I learned something from all of them. But so you mentioned that you've got some upcoming speaking engagements. Tell us about that.
Oh, well, actually, next weekend, I'm up here in Canada speaking at Falcon Lake. It's the second anniversary or second annual Falcon Lake UFO conference where I'll be speaking on the Falcon Lake case. There's a horseback ride that you need to go on to get to the actual site. If you're getting back to nature, it's a great way to do that. They're showing UFO movies on a giant screen and so forth. And then in August, I'm going to be in Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia, speaking at the Shag Harbor UFO Conference, Canada's version of Roswell. And in October, I'm speaking at the first scientific conference on ufology, which includes Klaus Swan from Scandinavia, as well as myself and a number of other individuals from across Canada and Europe, collaborating at a French conference. So I get to test my French.
Oh, congratulations. That's exciting. I love it. And I will keep people posted. And I again, thank you so much for being here. I knew that this was going to be an exceptional show. So you rock.
Thank you very much, Erica. It's been a delight.
Oh, absolutely. And I want to tell everyone that you can go learn more, read more, find credible information about this topic at ufoforum.blogspot.ca. Also, I just want to thank all of you for being here. Go to UFO Archives with Barry Greenwood as well. I've mentioned Barry Greenwood, Jen Aldrich, Project 1947. Learn the history, learn the truth about this, and then have a good foundation to work from. I'm Erica Lukes. We will see you next week.
Listen very carefully.
This is Houston. Say again, please. Houston, we've had a problem.
This is UFO Classified, live every Friday night, 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on the KCOR Digital Radio Network. The truth is out there, just waiting to be discovered.
And now, if you will, accompany me on a journey to the future.
For more information on the host of UFO Classified, Erica Lukes, upcoming guests, as well as links to the past shows,
visit her website at ufoclassified.com.
UFO Classified.
UFO Classified.
This is KCOR Las Vegas, home of the digital radio.